I sent $5,000 to my mother to fix her home. Months of extra shifts, sacrificed weekends, everything I had saved, wired across an ocean in 2 days because she called me crying, and I did not hesitate for a single second. And for almost a year, she told me the work was happening. My sisters confirmed it. My brothers confirmed it. Every phone call, every question I asked, answered with details so specific I never once doubted them. Until my youngest brother called me, voice shaking, and told me to pull over. There was no renovation. There never had been. The money was gone, distributed without my knowledge, and every person I loved had agreed to look me in the eye and lie. What I discovered when I walked through that door in India did not just cost me $5,000. It cost me the version of my family I had been working 18-hour days to protect for a decade. This is what really happened, and why it changed everything I believed about love, sacrifice, and the people we trust most. I still remember the smell of rain on dry earth the last time I stood in my mother's doorway. It was the kind of smell that stays with you, the kind that follows you across oceans and time zones and sleepless nights in a foreign country. I was 34 years old, carrying one suitcase and a heart full of promises I intended to keep. I told myself that leaving was not abandonment. I told myself it was sacrifice. I told myself that everything I was giving up would come back tenfold, not to me, but to the people I was leaving behind. That is the story immigrants tell themselves. It is the only story that makes the leaving bearable. My name is Ananya Patel. I am 43 years old. I have lived in the United States for almost a decade, and for almost a decade I have been sending money home. Not occasionally, not when it was convenient. Every single month, without exception, I transferred a portion of my earnings to my family in India, because that was the agreement I made with myself the moment I boarded that plane. I would build a better life, and I would bring them with me, slowly, imperfectly, but faithfully. I work as a caregiver for elderly people. I know what it looks like when someone is tired down to their bones. I see it in my patients sometimes, that kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep and everything to do with years of carrying more than one person should carry alone. I recognized it because I carried it too. I worked double shifts on weekdays. I worked weekends when my colleagues were going to restaurants or taking their children to parks. I celebrated birthdays alone, with a phone call home and a cup of tea I made for myself, in a small apartment that never quite felt like mine. None of that felt like too much to ask, because on the other end of those phone calls was my mother's voice, and my mother's voice was home. I grew up in a modest house in Gujarat. My father passed away when I was 19, and from that point forward, my mother held everything together with a quiet, unshakable strength that I have spent my entire life trying to understand and trying to inherit. She raised 5 children on very little. She never complained. She worked, she prayed, she cooked enormous meals from whatever she had, and she made every single one of us feel like the most important person in the room. I am the middle child. Between my 2 older siblings, my brother Vikram and my sister Priya, and my 2 younger ones, my brother Ravi and my sister Meena, I always felt like the hinge, the one who held the door steady while everyone else moved through it. When I left for America, that feeling did not disappear. It just changed shape. Instead of being physically present, I became financially present. I was the one who sent money for school fees, for medical emergencies, for small repairs and large ones, for my nephew's birthday and my niece's school uniform. I did not resent any of it. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I genuinely did not resent it. Helping my family was not a burden I carried reluctantly. It was a purpose I had chosen, a way of staying connected to people who were thousands of miles away. Every transfer, every wire, every digital transaction was a way of saying, I am still here. I have not forgotten you. You are the reason I wake up early and stay up late and do this thing that is hard and lonely and sometimes breaks my heart. So when my mother called me crying in January of that year, I did not hesitate. She told me the house was deteriorating badly. She described the roof first. During monsoon season, water came through in multiple places, and she had started placing buckets in the bedroom at night. Then she told me about the walls. Cracks had appeared along the outer structure, visible ones, the kind that worried her during heavy rains. Then the floor. One section near the kitchen had started to give slightly underfoot, soft in a way that concrete should never be soft. She said she was frightened. She said she did not feel safe in her own home. I listened to every word. I asked her questions. I tried to understand the full extent of the damage. And then I told her not to worry. I told her I would take care of it. Within 2 days, I had transferred $5,000 to her account. $5,000 is not a small amount of money on a caregiver's salary in the United States. It represented months of those extra shifts, those sacrificed weekends, those evenings I chose not to go anywhere or do anything so that money could accumulate instead of disappear. I had been saving it slowly, not for anything specific, just saving it the way people save when they have learned that emergencies arrive without warning. In the end, I used it all at once, without regret, because my mother's safety felt more important than any cushion I had built for myself. She thanked me in a way I had not heard before. She cried again, but differently. Not the frightened crying of the first call, but something softer, something that sounded like relief. She told me I was a good daughter. She told me she did not know what she would do without me. She said she would pray for me every day, that God would reward me for my goodness, that she was so proud of the woman I had become. I hung up the phone and I sat in my apartment for a long moment, feeling something I can only describe as fullness. The particular satisfaction of knowing that your sacrifice has landed somewhere it was needed, that your absence from a place has not made that place worse, but better. I had no reason to doubt anything she said. Over the following weeks, I asked about the progress. She told me they were still finding the right contractor. Labor was busy in the area. I understood. I told her there was no rush, that the money was there, that she should take her time and find someone reliable. A few weeks after that, she said the work had begun on the roof. I felt relieved. A few weeks after that, she said the walls were next. I imagined the house slowly becoming safer, stronger, the way houses should be. I imagined my mother sleeping without listening for the sound of rain. I imagined her in a kitchen with a floor that held steady beneath her feet. What I could not have imagined, what I would not have believed if someone had told me, was that none of it was happening, that the contractor did not exist, that no work had begun, not on the roof, not on the walls, not on the floor, that the house was exactly as she had described it to me on that first call, unchanged, unreformed, sitting quietly with all of its damage intact while my $5,000 was distributed elsewhere, and that my mother, the woman whose voice was home, the woman I had built my sacrifices around, had asked every one of my siblings to lie to my face. I did not know any of this yet. I was still sitting with that feeling of fullness, that satisfaction, that sense of purpose. It would be months before I learned the truth, and when I did, it would not be my mother who told me. It would be the youngest one, the one who called me, voice trembling, because he had heard something that changed everything. But that comes later. First, you need to understand what it cost me to send that money. Not in dollars, in years. There is a particular kind of trust that exists between a mother and a child that does not require evidence. It is not the trust you build with a colleague over years of working together, or the trust you develop with a friend after they have proven themselves in difficult moments. It is older than that. It is the trust that was installed before you had the language to question it, before you understood that the people who love you are still, in the end, just people, capable of fear, capable of desperation, capable of decisions that make sense to them in ways they never fully explain to you. I trusted my mother the way I trusted gravity, without thinking about it, without needing proof. That trust is what made the months that followed so easy to live through and so devastating to look back on. After the money was sent, life continued the way it always did. I woke up early. I drove to my clients' homes. I helped people eat, bathe, move through their days with whatever dignity their bodies still allowed them. I came home in the evenings tired in that specific way that caregiving makes you tired, not just physically, but emotionally emptied, having poured yourself into someone else's comfort all day long. I made dinner. I called home. I asked about the renovation. And every time I asked, I received an answer that satisfied me just enough to stop asking further. My mother was not always the one who answered. Sometimes it was my older sister Priya who picked up the phone. Priya told me the contractor had started on the roof, but the materials had arrived late from the supplier. She described the way the workers had torn open one section of the ceiling to inspect the beams underneath, and how they had found the damage was more extensive than originally thought. She used specific details. She said the main beam on the eastern side had water rot and would need to be replaced entirely before they could close everything up again. She sounded informed. She sounded like someone who had been watching the process closely. I believed her. I remember thinking that Priya had always been the organized one, the one who kept records and followed up on things. Of course she would know about the beam on the eastern side. Of course she would have spoken to the contractor herself. That was so like her. A few weeks after that, my brother Vikram called me for something unrelated, to ask about a contact I might have who could help his son find information about student visas to Canada. We talked for a while. Near the end of the call, I asked about the house. He said it was coming along well. He said the walls were next, after the roof was finished. He said our mother seemed more relaxed now that the worst of the work was underway. He said she had been sleeping better. I felt something warm move through my chest when he said that. The image of my mother sleeping peacefully, without the sound of water dripping into buckets beside her bed, was exactly the image I had been carrying with me through all those long shifts. That image was part of what made the sacrifice feel real, feel worth it. I did not ask too many questions. I see that now. I understand that I made it easier for them by not pressing harder. But I also want to be honest about why I did not press harder. Because pressing harder would have meant introducing doubt. And doubt in that context felt disloyal. These were my family members. These were the people I loved and worked for and sent money to every single month. To interrogate them would have felt like an accusation. And I did not want to be the kind of daughter, the kind of sister, who treated her own family like suspects. That is the trap, I think. The trap that catches so many of us who live far from home and send money back. We are already carrying guilt. The guilt of having left. The guilt of having built something for ourselves while the people we love continue to struggle. And guilt makes us pliable. It makes us want to believe the best. It makes us lean toward the reassuring answer and away from the uncomfortable question. Because the uncomfortable question, if it leads somewhere dark, means that the sacrifice was not just difficult. It means the sacrifice was also taken advantage of. And that is a thought too heavy to carry on top of everything else. So I believe them. Week after week, I believed them. There were moments that, looking back now, I can identify as small ruptures in the story. Not obvious lies, nothing I could have caught in the moment, but small inconsistencies that accumulated without my realizing it. Once my mother mentioned that the contractor had just started on the kitchen floor, but 2 weeks earlier, Priya had told me the kitchen floor was already done. I noticed the discrepancy for a half second, and then my mind smoothed it over. Perhaps I had misunderstood. Perhaps the kitchen floor had needed additional work. Perhaps the first round of repairs had revealed something underneath that required attention. There were always explanations. I was always willing to find them. Another time, I asked my mother to send me a photograph of the progress. She said her phone camera was not working well. She said the images came out blurry, and she did not want to send me something that would not show the work properly. She said she would ask Ravi to take photos with his phone next time he visited. The photos never arrived. I asked once more, a few weeks later. She said Ravi had been very busy. I let it go. I let it go. How many times in those months did I let something go that I should have held on to? How many small moments of hesitation did I dismiss in the name of trust? I cannot count them all now. What I can tell you is that by the time summer arrived, I had completely stopped questioning the timeline. The renovation had taken longer than expected. That was all. Renovations always take longer than expected. Everyone knows that. There was no reason to be alarmed. And then, in the early weeks of autumn, I did something that changed everything. I bought a plane ticket to India. I had not been back in years. The combination of work schedules, the cost of travel, and the complicated emotional weight of returning to a place I had left had kept me away longer than I intended. But that year, something shifted. I missed my mother with a physical intensity that surprised me. I wanted to see the house, the repaired house, the safer house, the house that my $5,000 had helped rebuild. I wanted to sit in that kitchen with the steady floor and drink tea with my mother, and feel, in a direct and embodied way, that my sacrifices had amounted to something I could touch. I booked the ticket without telling anyone except my mother. She sounded happy. She said she could not wait to see me. She said she would cook everything I loved. She said it had been too long. What I did not know was that the moment I told her about the ticket, something shifted on the other side of the world. My mother hung up the phone and, I imagine, sat very still for a long moment, because she knew that when I arrived, I would walk through the front door and see immediately what had not been done: the cracks in the walls, the damaged ceiling, the soft place in the kitchen floor. Everything exactly as it had been the day she called me crying. She had believed, for months, that she would find a way to fix it before I found out. She had believed that the situation would resolve itself somehow, that one of my siblings would pay the money back, that she could quietly arrange a real renovation before I ever had reason to suspect anything. And now I was coming, and nothing was resolved. And the truth was sitting in that house waiting for me the same way all hidden things wait, patiently, immovably, certain that eventually it will be found. What happened next was not my mother who broke first. It was Ravi, my youngest brother, 29 years old, who had not been part of the original decision, who had learned about it only after the money was already distributed, who had gone along with the story because he did not know how to refuse. Ravi was the one who could not carry it anymore. He called me on a Tuesday evening. I was driving home from a client's house. I remember the particular quality of the light that day, the way autumn in America turns the late afternoon gold and heavy. I answered because it was Ravi, and Ravi calling on a Tuesday evening was unusual enough to pick up immediately. His voice told me everything before his words did. It had the sound of someone who has been holding something for too long and can no longer hold it. It had the sound of someone choosing between two kinds of pain and deciding that one of them, the immediate kind, was more survivable than the other. He told me to pull over, and I did. I pulled into a parking lot outside a grocery store I had passed 100 times without ever stopping. The engine was still running. The radio was playing something low and meaningless. I turned it off. The silence that replaced it felt significant, the kind of silence that arrives just before something in your life divides itself into before and after. Ravi asked me again if I was sitting down. I told him I was parked. He said, okay. Then he said nothing for a moment that felt much longer than it was. I asked him what was wrong. He said he did not know how to start. I told him to just start anywhere. What followed was one of the most disorienting conversations of my adult life. Not because the words were complicated. They were not. Ravi spoke clearly, even through the trembling in his voice. He was not confused about what he was telling me. He was simply devastated by it. And devastation, when it belongs to someone you love, has a way of transmitting itself directly through a phone line and settling into your own chest before you have even processed the information. He told me there was no renovation. I heard the words. I understood them grammatically. And then I sat with them for a moment, while my mind tried to find the framework that would make them make sense. I thought perhaps he meant the renovation was not finished. I thought perhaps something had gone wrong with the contractor. I was already reaching for explanations, already building the scaffolding of a story that would let me keep believing what I had believed for months. Then he said it again, differently. He said the money I sent was not used for the house. The scaffolding came down. I asked him what he meant. He told me. He told me slowly, carefully, like someone handling something that could shatter if moved too quickly. He told me that our mother had made a decision in the weeks after I sent the money. She had looked at the $5,000 sitting in her account, and she had looked at the needs of her other children, and she had decided, in the way that mothers sometimes decide things, unilaterally and with complete conviction that they know best, that the money could do more good distributed among the family than spent on the house alone. Vikram had received a portion to help settle debts from his failed business. Priya had received money for her children's school fees. Another portion had gone to cover a vehicle repair for one of my other siblings. The remainder had been used for various smaller expenses that my mother had deemed urgent. By the time the decisions were finished, the $5,000 was gone, dispersed, absorbed into the daily struggles of people I loved, without my knowledge and without my consent. And then my mother had asked everyone to say nothing. I sat in that parking lot, and I listened to my brother tell me this. And I felt something happening in my chest that I do not have a precise word for. It was not anger, not yet. It was something that comes before anger, something closer to structural failure, the sensation of something load-bearing giving way inside you. I had built so much on top of my trust in my mother. Years of sacrifice justified by the belief that she received it with honesty. Years of hard work given meaning by the knowledge that it was reaching her, reaching all of them, in the form I intended. Now I was being told that the form I intended did not matter, that the decision about what my money became had been made without me, that I had been managed carefully and collectively by the entire family I had spent a decade trying to hold together from across an ocean. I asked Ravi why he was telling me now. He said because he had found out I was coming. He said he could not let me arrive and walk through that front door and discover it that way, alone, without warning. He said he had gone back and forth for days about whether to call. He said every time he decided not to call, he imagined my face when I saw the house unchanged, and he could not live with that image. I told him I needed a moment. He said he understood. I set the phone down on the passenger seat without ending the call, and I looked through the windshield at the parking lot. A woman was loading groceries into her car. A child was sitting in a shopping cart, kicking his feet. Everything was completely ordinary and completely separate from what was happening inside me. I picked the phone back up. I asked Ravi one question. I asked him if he had participated in the lie. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said yes. He said he had not known about it from the beginning, that he had found out several weeks after the money was already distributed. But once he knew, he had said nothing. When I called and asked about the renovation, he had offered vague, non-committal answers that neither confirmed nor denied anything. He said he was ashamed. He said he did not know how to refuse our mother once she had made a decision. He said he was telling me now because it was the only thing he could think of to do that was not completely wrong. I told him I was grateful he called. I meant it, even in that moment. Even with everything crashing down around me, I could recognize that what Ravi had done required courage that the rest of them had not found. He would face consequences for telling me. My mother would know he had broken the agreement. My siblings would know. He had chosen my right to know over his own comfort, and that was not a small thing. We said goodbye. I sat in the car for a long time after that. The drive home was automatic. I do not remember it. I remember arriving at my apartment and sitting on the edge of my bed without turning the lights on. And I remember the feeling of the silence in that room, which was different from the silence before Ravi called. Before, silence had been neutral, just the absence of sound. Now it felt populated, filled with all the conversations my family had been having without me. All the moments when someone had picked up my call and chosen deliberately to look me in the eye through the phone and say the words that would keep me believing. I thought about Priya describing the beam on the eastern side with water rot, the specificity of it. She had invented that detail. She had sat somewhere in India and constructed a plausible architectural problem and delivered it to me with the confidence of someone who had been there and seen it with her own eyes. And I had received it with the full trust of someone who had no reason to doubt her sister. I thought about my mother telling me she could not send photographs because her phone camera was blurry. Such a small, simple deflection. So easy to believe. So easy to produce. I thought about all the prayers she had offered on my behalf, all the things she had said about God rewarding my goodness. I did not think those prayers were insincere. I believed, and still believe, that my mother meant them. I think she genuinely believed she had made the right decision. I think she told herself a story in which she was not deceiving me, but protecting me from a complexity I did not need to understand, from a family problem she would resolve before it ever reached me. But intention and impact are not the same thing, and the impact of what she did lived in my body for weeks before I ever arrived in India. The weeks between Ravi's call and my departure were some of the strangest of my life. I continued going to work. I continued caring for my patients with the same attention I always brought. I continued calling home, because I had not yet decided how to handle what I knew. I was not ready to confront anyone over the phone. I did not trust myself to say the right things from a distance. I needed to be there. I needed to see the house with my own eyes, to stand in front of my mother and have this conversation in person where there was nowhere for either of us to hide. So I waited. And while I waited, I listened differently to every call. I heard the maintenance of the story in real time. I heard my mother mention casually that the contractor had finished the ceiling work and was now moving to the exterior walls. I heard her describe the color of the new plaster. She had prepared details. She had built a complete fictional renovation in her mind and was narrating it to me with the ease of someone who had told the story enough times to believe pieces of it herself. I said nothing. I asked small questions and received small invented answers, and I stored all of it somewhere inside me, in the place where you store things you are not yet ready to release. When I finally boarded the plane, I was not the same person who had boarded a plane to America almost a decade earlier. That woman had left with promises and hope and the uncomplicated trust of someone who had never yet been asked to question the foundation of her own family. The woman boarding this plane knew something that changes a person permanently. She knew that love and honesty are not the same thing, and she was about to walk through a door that would make that knowledge impossible to unknow. The flight from the United States to India is long enough to live an entire emotional life inside. I have made that journey before, in both directions, and each time it carries its own particular weight. This time, the weight was different from anything I had felt before. It was not the heaviness of missing home, or the exhaustion of travel, or even the grief of leaving one life to visit another. It was the weight of knowing, of carrying a truth that had not yet been spoken out loud between the people it belonged to. I slept in fragments. I watched the hours pass on the small screen in front of me. I thought about what I would say, and in what order and how I would manage myself when the moment arrived. I had rehearsed versions of the confrontation so many times over the previous weeks that they had started to feel theatrical, overwritten. I decided, somewhere over the middle of that flight, that I would not rehearse anymore. I would simply walk through the door and let what needed to happen, happen. My mother was waiting outside when the car arrived. She looked smaller than I remembered. That is something I have noticed each time I return. The people I love seem to have contracted slightly in my absence, as if distance miniaturizes the things it separates us from. She was smiling. She opened her arms and I walked into them, and she held me the way she has always held me, tightly, with her face pressed against the side of my head. And for one long and terrible moment, I allowed myself to simply be her daughter. Then I stepped back and looked at the house behind her. The cracks in the outer wall were exactly as she had described them on that phone call almost a year earlier. The tejado showed the same damage, the same deterioration she had cried about, the same problems that had moved me to send $5,000 without hesitation. All of it was precisely where it had always been, untouched, unrepaired, waiting. My mother was watching my face. I looked at her. She looked at me. And in that moment, before a single word was spoken, I believe she understood that I already knew. Something moved across her expression. Not guilt exactly, but something adjacent to it. The specific look of someone who has been carrying a secret and has just felt the weight of it shift, transferred silently from one person to another. I carried my bag inside. I sat down. I accepted the tea she brought me. I drank it slowly. And then I asked her, in the quietest voice I could find, to tell me what had happened to the money I sent for the house. She was still for a long moment. Then she began to talk. What came out of her over the next hour was not a simple confession. It was a complex, layered explanation that moved between justification and regret, and something that sounded very much like the genuine belief that she had done the right thing. She told me about Vikram's debts. She described the specific pressure he was under, the calls from people he owed money to, the way he had stopped eating properly because of the stress. She told me about Priya's children and the school fees, and how Priya had cried on the phone to her for an hour. She told me about the vehicle repair and why it had been urgent and what would have happened to that sibling's income without it. She told me all of this as if she were building a case, as if the urgency of everyone else's needs would, when added together, equal something that made what she did reasonable, logical, even loving. And I listened to all of it without interrupting. When she finished, I asked her one question. I asked why she had not called me and explained all of this and asked me what I wanted to do with the money, why the decision had been made in secret rather than in conversation, why the choice to distribute the funds had been accompanied by the choice to construct an elaborate lie and ask every member of the family to maintain it. She said she had not wanted to worry me. She said she knew I worked hard and she did not want me to feel like my money was being pulled in too many directions. She said she thought she could manage everything quietly and that by the time I found out, if I found out, the situation would already be resolved. She said she had intended to repair the house eventually. She said she believed everything would work out. I sat with that for a long time. Then I told her that I did not believe that any of those reasons, individually or together, justified what had happened, that the issue was not the distribution of the money. I told her directly that if she had called me and explained the situation, Vikram's debts, Priya's school fees, the vehicle, all of it, I would likely have tried to help. I would have had a conversation with her about how to address each problem. I might have sent more money over time, or found other solutions, or at the very least I would have been part of the decision that involved my own earnings and my own sacrifices. What I could not accept was being removed from that decision entirely. What I could not accept was the lie. Not a single lie told in a moment of panic, but a sustained, collective, months-long performance maintained by every person in this family simultaneously. That was when she called my siblings in. They came into the room one by one. Vikram first, then Priya, then the others. Ravi came in last, and he did not look at anyone directly. The room filled up with the people I had loved my entire life, and the atmosphere was something I had never experienced in that house before. It was the atmosphere of reckoning, of a truth that had been contained finally refusing to be contained any further. What happened in that room over the following hours was not simple. It was not a clean confrontation with a clean resolution. It was messy, and it was painful, and it uncovered things that went far beyond the $5,000 and the renovation that never happened. Vikram said things that surprised me. He said he had always felt that I sent money with conditions attached, even when I did not say so explicitly. He said there was pressure embedded in the generosity, an unspoken expectation that, because I provided financially, my judgment should carry more weight in family decisions. I had never thought of myself this way. I had never intended to attach conditions to anything I sent. But sitting in that room and listening to him say it, I had to ask myself honestly whether the intention mattered if the impact was real. Priya said she had felt guilty every day. She said she had told herself repeatedly that she would find a way to return the money, that this would all be temporary, that she would fix it before it became what it had now become. She was crying. I believed that her guilt was genuine. I also understood sitting there that genuine guilt is not the same as not doing the thing. People feel guilty and do the thing anyway. Guilt is not a preventative. It is just the feeling that arrives after. My mother said very little after her initial explanation. She sat with her hands in her lap, and she looked old in a way that I had not noticed when I first arrived. She looked like someone who had been holding something heavy for a very long time and had finally set it down, and the setting down had not brought relief, but only the visibility of how much the holding had cost her. I did not scream. I did not say things I could not take back. I had promised myself I would not do those things, and I kept that promise. But I said clearly to all of them that trust is not an infinite resource, that it can be spent, that what they had done collectively had spent something between us that I did not know how to replenish yet, and that I was not willing to pretend otherwise for the sake of keeping the surface of the family smooth and untroubled. I told them I needed time. I stayed in India for 2 weeks. I stayed in that house, with those cracks in the walls and that damaged ceiling, and I moved through the days with the particular strangeness of being in a place that is both deeply familiar and suddenly foreign. I talked more with Ravi than with anyone else. He was the only one with whom I felt I did not have to manage my own reactions carefully. On the day I left, my mother walked me to the car again. She held my face in her hands the way she used to when I was young, and looked at me for a long time without speaking. Then she said she was sorry. Not the complicated, qualified sorry of the room full of siblings, a simple one. Just those 2 words, without explanation or justification attached. I told her I loved her, because I did, because I do, because love and betrayal are not mutually exclusive. And one of the hardest things I have ever had to learn is that someone can do both to you at the same time. On the flight home, I thought about the woman I was when I left India the first time. All those promises, all that uncomplicated faith. I thought about how I had built my life in America on the foundation of those promises, and how the foundation had turned out to be more complicated than I knew. I still send money home. Not the same way. Not without conversations. Not without transparency about what it is for, and what it will be used for, and what I expect. I do not know if that is trust rebuilt or trust replaced with something more careful. I do not know yet if those are the same thing. What I know is this: the $5,000 is gone. The house still needs repair, and the family I thought I understood turned out to be something more human, more flawed, and more complicated than the version I had been carrying with me across an ocean for almost a decade. I am still learning what to do with that. I think I will be learning for a long time.